Have you ever been so have you ever been so generous with your knowledge and expertise that you literally trained your own replacement? That moment when you realize your kindness and mentorship have been weaponized against you? That's exactly what happened to Michael Chen on a cold February morning in downtown Chicago. Michael, 41 years old, had spent 15 years building his career at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, one of the most prestigious advertising agencies in the Midwest. Starting as a junior account manager fresh out of Northwestern University, he'd worked his way up to senior vice president of client strategy, managing a portfolio worth over $40 million annually. His clients included Fortune 500 companies. His strategies had won industry awards, and his reputation in Chicago's marketing circles was impeccable. But in the cutthroat world of corporate America, reputation and loyalty mean nothing when ambition meets opportunity. It all started 18 months ago when Derek Williams joined Pinnacle as an account coordinator. 26 years old, fresh from an MBA program at University of Chicago Booth School of Business, Derek was hungry, charismatic, and exactly the kind of talent Pinnacle loved to recruit. He'd been assigned to Michael's team, and from day one, Derek made it clear he wanted to learn from the best. "Mr. Chen," Derek had said during their first one-on-one meeting, his enthusiasm seemingly genuine. "I've studied your campaigns for years. The Midwest Motors relaunch, the Lakeside Banking digital transformation. Brilliant work. I want to learn everything you can teach me." Michael, flattered and remembering his own struggles as a young professional without a mentor, had decided to take Derek under his wing. It seemed like the right thing to do, pay forward the knowledge he'd accumulated through years of trial and error. What would you do if a talented young professional asked for your mentorship? Would you share everything you knew, or would you hold back, protecting your competitive advantage? Over the next 12 months, Michael essentially gave Derek a masterclass in high-level marketing strategy. He brought Derek to client meetings, let him observe pitch presentations, shared proprietary research methodologies, and even introduced him to his personal network of industry contacts. Michael taught Derek the subtle art of reading client psychology, the technical skills of data-driven campaign optimization, and the political navigation required to succeed in corporate environments. "You're a natural," Michael would often tell Derek, proud of how quickly his protege was absorbing information. "You remind me of myself at your age, hungry, dedicated, willing to learn." Derek always responded with gratitude and humility. "I owe everything to you, Michael. You're not just a mentor, you're like the big brother I never had." Looking back now, Michael realized every word had been calculated manipulation. The first warning sign came about 14 months into their mentorship. Michael noticed Derek had started having private meetings with Janet Morrison, Pinnacle's CEO. This wasn't unusual. Rising stars often got FaceTime with leadership. But the frequency and secrecy felt off. When Michael casually asked Derek about it, the younger man's explanation was smooth and believable. "Oh, Janet just wanted my perspective on some millennial marketing trends. You know how leadership is always trying to stay current with younger demographics." Michael had accepted this explanation without question. That was his first mistake. The second warning sign was when Derek started volunteering for high-visibility projects that Michael had traditionally led. Again, Michael interpreted this as ambition and initiative, qualities he wanted to encourage. He even recommended Derek for several of these assignments, thinking he was helping launch a promising career. His third mistake was introducing Derek to Marcus Webb, Michael's most important client and the CMO of Midwest Motors, a relationship Michael had cultivated for over 8 years. Marcus and Michael had become friends beyond business, golfing together, attending industry events, even having occasional dinners with their families. "Marcus, I want you to meet Derek Williams," Michael had said at a client dinner 6 months ago. "He's my protege, and I think he's got tremendous potential. I'm grooming him to help manage your account." Marcus had been impressed with Derek immediately. The younger man had charm, polish, and just the right amount of deference mixed with confidence. After that dinner, Derek started attending more Midwest Motors meetings, taking on bigger pieces of the account management. Michael thought he was building a strong team. He didn't realize he was making himself redundant. The truth started revealing itself 3 months ago during Pinnacle's annual strategic planning session. Janet Morrison stood before the senior leadership team and announced a bold restructuring to position the company for future growth. We need fresh perspectives to compete in an increasingly digital, youth-oriented marketplace, Janet explained, her voice carrying that corporate speak that always preceded bad news. We're going to be elevating some of our rising stars into leadership positions and creating new roles that better align with our strategic direction. Michael had assumed this meant promotions for talented people like Derek. He was right, but not in the way he'd imagined. I'm pleased to announce that Derek Williams is being promoted to Vice President of Strategic Innovation, Janet continued. Derek will be leading our new digital transformation initiative and will report directly to me. The room erupted in polite applause. Michael joined in, genuinely happy for his mentee, but Janet wasn't finished. As part of this restructuring, we're consolidating our client strategy functions under Derek's new division. Michael Chen will be transitioning to a senior advisory role, focusing on knowledge transfer and strategic consulting. The corporate euphemisms were transparent to anyone who'd been in business long enough. Senior advisory role meant we're pushing you aside. Knowledge transfer meant train your replacement. Strategic consulting meant we're eliminating your actual authority. Michael's blood ran cold. He looked across the conference table at Derek, expecting to see surprise, or at least acknowledgement of the awkward situation. Instead, Derek met his eyes with a small, satisfied smile that lasted just a fraction of a second before returning to an expression of professional neutrality. In that moment, Michael understood everything. The private meetings with Janet, the gradual takeover of his projects, the cultivation of his client relationships. Derek hadn't been learning from Michael. He'd been systematically replacing him. How would you react in this moment? What would you do if you realized your mentee had been plotting your professional destruction while you were generously sharing everything you knew? The worst part came in the days following the announcement. Derek scheduled a meeting with Michael under the guise of discussing the transition. They met in what had been Michael's office but was now designated as Derek's. Michael, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've taught me, Derek began, sitting in the executive chair that Michael had occupied for 7 years. You're an incredible mentor, and I've learned so much from you. Cut the shit, Derek, Michael said, his usual professionalism cracking under the weight of betrayal. You planned this. You used me. Derek's expression shifted from fake gratitude to cold calculation. I learned from the best, didn't I? You taught me that in business, you identify opportunities and exploit them. Well, you were an opportunity, an aging executive with valuable knowledge and relationships, but no vision for the digital future. I saw that opportunity and I exploited it. I trusted you. I gave you access to everything. My strategies, my clients, my network. And I'm grateful for that, truly. But you were naive, Michael. This is corporate America. Nobody stays on top forever. You taught me the skills I needed, and now I'm using them. That's not betrayal. That's evolution. Michael stared at this young man he'd mentored for 18 months, seeing him clearly for the first time. You think you can do my job just because I taught you the mechanics? There's 15 years of experience, relationships and instinct that you can't learn in a year. Derek leaned back in Michael's former chair with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. We'll see about that. Oh, and about that senior advisory role, Janet wants you to spend the next 60 days doing a complete knowledge transfer. Document all your client relationships, strategic processes, proprietary methodologies, everything. Think of it as one last teaching opportunity. And if I refuse, then your severance package disappears and we terminate you for cause. Failure to fulfill transitional duties. Your choice. Michael left that meeting with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. Derek thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully maneuvered himself into Michael's position, using Michael's own knowledge against him. But Derek had made several fatal errors in his calculation. First, he'd underestimated how deep Michael's industry relationships really went. The contacts Derek had been introduced to were just the visible tip of a network Michael had built over 15 years. Second, he assumed the skills Michael had taught him were the full extent of Michael's expertise. They weren't even half. Third, and most critically, Derek forgot a fundamental rule of corporate warfare. Never completely destroy someone who has nothing left to lose. Michael Chen had just lost his job, his reputation, and his pride. Derek Williams was about to learn what a truly dangerous combination that could be. What do you think Michael should do? If you were betrayed by someone you'd mentored, how far would you go to make things right? The next morning, Michael began what would become a 60-day masterclass in strategic revenge disguised as cooperative knowledge transfer. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of Derek's betrayal and the political landscape that had enabled it. Michael scheduled coffee with Robert Martinez, a fellow VP who'd been at Pinnacle even longer than Michael. Robert was one of the few people in the company Michael genuinely trusted. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" Michael asked over lattes at their usual cafe near the office. Robert sighed. "I suspected something about 6 months ago. Derek was spending a lot of time with Janet, and the conversations always seemed to stop when other people came near. But Michael, I didn't know how to tell you without sounding paranoid or jealous. What exactly did Derek promise Janet to get this promotion?" "From what I've pieced together, he sold himself as the future of the company. Young, digital native, connected to millennial and Gen Z markets. He also apparently did a very detailed presentation about how the company could cut costs by consolidating your role and his into a single position." His position, obviously. Michael felt anger rising but forced himself to think strategically. What's Janet's endgame here? She's been CEO for 3 years and the company's performance has been flat. She needs a win. Exactly. She's under pressure from the board to show growth and innovation. Derek positioned himself as the key to both. He's promised a 20% revenue increase in the next fiscal year through digital transformation initiatives. That's insane. There's no way he can deliver that. Robert raised an eyebrow. Can't he? He's got your client relationships, your strategies, your methodologies, plus whatever new digital approaches he's been developing. On paper, it looks achievable. On paper, Michael repeated, an idea beginning to form. Robert, what would happen if Derek's first major initiative as VP failed spectacularly? Janet would look foolish for promoting him. The board would question her judgment. It could even cost her the CEO position if it's bad enough. And what if that failure could be traced back to Derek's inexperience and poor judgment rather than external factors? Robert studied Michael carefully. What are you planning? Knowledge transfer, Michael said with a slight smile. Derek wants me to document everything I know. I'm going to give him exactly what he asked for, and nothing more. Over the next 60 days, Michael executed a plan of surgical precision. He documented his processes, strategies, and methodologies exactly as requested. But what he shared was the what without the why or the when. He gave Derek the tools, but not the wisdom about when and how to use them. For example, Michael documented his proprietary client assessment framework, a sophisticated system for analyzing client needs and developing strategic recommendations. It looked impressive on paper, filled with charts, matrices, and analytical processes. What Michael didn't document were the crucial judgment calls about when to use which components, how to read between the lines of client feedback, or which clients would respond to which approaches. He shared his pitch presentation templates, award-winning formats that had closed millions in new business. But he didn't include the subtle customizations he made for different client personalities, the timing strategies for when to present different concepts, or the psychological techniques for handling objections. Most importantly, when Derek asked Michael to introduce him to his deeper network contacts, Michael complied with apparent cooperation. He made the introductions, sat through the meetings, and vouched for Derek's capabilities. But in private follow-up calls with these contacts, people he'd known for years, Michael planted subtle seeds of concern. Derek's got talent, no question, Michael would say to Marcus Webb over drinks. Just keep in mind he's still learning the ropes. If anything feels off with his recommendations, don't hesitate to call me directly. I'll always be available to my friends, even in this new advisory capacity. These weren't lies, they were strategic positioning. Michael was creating a safety net of relationships that bypassed Derek entirely. Meanwhile, Michael was also conducting his own quiet investigation into Derek's background and promises. What he discovered was illuminating. Derek's MBA thesis had been titled Disrupting Traditional Marketing Hierarchies Through Digital-First Strategies. The entire document was a blueprint for exactly what Derek had done. Identify established executives in traditional marketing roles, learn their skills and relationships, then leverage digital trends to position yourself as their more relevant replacement. It wasn't personal. Michael wasn't even Derek's first victim. At Derek's previous company, a mid-sized agency in Minneapolis, he'd done something similar to a senior account director who'd mentored him. That executive had been forced out after Derek convinced leadership he could do the same job for less money with better digital integration. The pattern was clear. Derek was a professional protege who weaponized mentorship. But Michael also discovered something else. Derek's promised 20% revenue growth was based almost entirely on Michael's existing client relationships and pending projects. Derek was planning to take credit for deals Michael had been cultivating for months, present strategies Michael had developed as his own innovations, and claim revenue from contracts that would have closed regardless of who was managing them. It was a house of cards, and Michael was going to make sure it collapsed at exactly the right moment. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Marcus Webb called Michael on a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks into the knowledge transfer period. "Michael, I need your honest opinion about something," Marcus said, his voice tense. "Derek presented a complete overhaul of our spring campaign strategy this morning. It's radically different from what you and I had been developing. He's calling it a digital-first revolution of our brand positioning." "What are the core elements?" Michael asked, though he already suspected what Derek had done. "He wants to completely abandon our traditional media mix and go all in on social media influencer partnerships and viral content creation. He's projecting a 40% cost reduction with a 60% increase in engagement metrics." Michael closed his eyes. This was one of the documented strategies he'd shared with Derek, but it was a strategy designed for a completely different type of client. Michael had developed this approach for a youth-oriented beverage company trying to reach Gen Z consumers. Midwest Motors' primary demographic was suburban families aged 35 to 60 making major purchase decisions about reliable vehicles. Derek had grabbed a shiny-looking strategy without understanding the client context. It was exactly the kind of error an inexperienced strategist makes when they have process knowledge but not situational wisdom. "Marcus, can I ask what your gut reaction was to this proposal?" "Honestly, it feels like we'd be abandoning our core customers to chase a demographic that doesn't buy our vehicles." But Derek was so confident, and Janet was in the meeting giving it her full endorsement. "I'm second-guessing my instincts." This was Michael's moment. He could either let Derek fail on his own, or he could help Derek destroy himself more completely. "Marcus, let me ask you something. In the 8 years we've worked together, have I ever steered you wrong?" "Never. Not once." "Then trust your gut on this. Derek's strategy isn't wrong for every brand. It's just wrong for yours. If you implement this, you'll alienate your core customers, waste your media budget on audiences that won't convert, and damage brand equity you've spent decades building. And by the time you realize it's not working, you'll have lost market share to your competitors. So what should I do?" "Tell Derek and Janet you need a week to consider the proposal. In that time, I'll prepare an alternative analysis. Not because I'm trying to undermine Derek, but because you deserve a comprehensive evaluation before making a decision this significant. I'll do it as a favor to you, not as a Pinnacle employee, just as a friend who cares about your success." "Michael, I appreciate that more than you know." After hanging up, Michael spent the weekend creating a comprehensive analysis of Derek's proposal. It was a masterpiece of strategic critique, objective, data-driven, and devastating. He didn't attack Derek personally. He simply demonstrated with impeccable logic and industry research why Derek's approach would fail for this specific client. More importantly, Michael included a detailed alternative strategy that built on the work he and Marcus had been developing before the restructuring. It was everything Derek's proposal wasn't: thoughtful, client-specific, and likely to succeed. When Marcus presented both analyses to Janet and Derek the following week, The contrast was stark. Derek's proposal looked flashy but shallow. Michael's analysis looked sophisticated and substantive. I appreciate Derek's innovative thinking, Marcus told the Pinnacle team. But after thorough consideration, I'm going to move forward with Michael's strategic framework. It's more aligned with our brand values and target demographics. Michael wasn't in the meeting, but Robert Martinez reported back that Derek's face had gone pale and Janet had looked furious. This was supposed to be Derek's first major win as the new VP of Strategic Innovation. Instead, it had turned into a very public demonstration that he couldn't manage Pinnacle's most important client without Michael's guidance. But this was just the beginning. Over the next month, a pattern emerged. Projects that Derek managed using Michael's documented processes would hit unexpected complications. Clients would express subtle dissatisfaction with Derek's recommendations. Pitches that should have been slam dunks would fall flat for reasons Derek couldn't quite understand. None of this was Michael's direct sabotage. It was simply the natural consequence of having process without wisdom, knowledge without experience, and confidence without competence. Meanwhile, Michael was building his exit strategy. He'd started quietly reaching out to his industry network, letting key people know he was going to be available for new opportunities after his transition period ended. The response was overwhelming. 3 competing agencies immediately expressed interest in bringing him aboard. 2 former clients reached out about consulting opportunities, and 1 venture capital firm wanted to discuss funding a new agency that Michael would lead. Derek had thought removing Michael from Pinnacle would eliminate the competition. Instead, he'd created a much more dangerous enemy, a well-connected industry veteran with nothing to lose and every motivation to succeed. The final confrontation came during Michael's last week at Pinnacle. Janet called him into her office for what she termed an exit interview. "Michael, I'll be direct," Janet began. "Several clients have expressed concerns about the transition to Derek's leadership. They're asking for you to remain involved with their accounts." "I'm sure Derek can handle it," Michael said neutrally. "That's not what I'm hearing. Marcus Webb specifically said he'll need to reconsider Pinnacle's contract renewal if you're not involved in account management." Michael let that hang in the air. Marcus hadn't said that yet, but he'd hinted at it in their last conversation, and Michael had encouraged that perspective. "Janet, I'm a bit confused about what you're asking. You restructured my position and promoted Derek specifically to take over these responsibilities. Now you're saying clients don't want that?" Janet's expression tightened. "I'm saying that perhaps we were premature in some aspects of the restructuring. I'd like to discuss options for you to maintain a more active role, perhaps as a senior managing director working alongside Derek." Michael allowed himself a small smile. "That's a generous offer, but I've accepted a position elsewhere. I'll be launching my own strategic consulting firm, actually. Several former clients have already signed on as founding accounts." The color drained from Janet's face. "You're taking Pinnacle clients?" "I'm accepting work from companies that seek my services," Michael corrected. "All former clients, I should note, not current Pinnacle accounts. I'm quite careful about ethical boundaries." This was technically true. Michael had been meticulous about not soliciting current Pinnacle clients, but he knew from conversations with Marcus and others that several would likely approach him once their current contracts ended. He wouldn't need to recruit them. They'd come to him. "Michael, I hope we can be professional about this transition. No need for any negativity." "Of course not. I'm grateful for my 15 years at Pinnacle, and I'm particularly grateful for the learning experience of these past few months. It's taught me valuable lessons about corporate loyalty and the importance of building relationships that transcend any single employer." Janet understood the implication. The relationships that had made Michael valuable to Pinnacle weren't owned by Pinnacle. They were Michael's personal network, built over 15 years of excellent work and genuine relationship building. Derek could take Michael's title and office, but he couldn't take what really mattered. As Michael cleared out his desk on his final day, Derek stopped by. The arrogance from their last conversation had been replaced by something that looked like concern. "Michael, I wanted to say, I hope there are no hard feelings about how things worked out." Michael looked at the younger man who'd betrayed his trust and used his generosity as a weapon. "Derek, you taught me something valuable about modern corporate culture, Success isn't about loyalty or mentorship or building people up. It's about identifying opportunities and exploiting them. Your words, not mine. Look, the Marcus Webb situation was just a misunderstanding of client needs. I'm learning the nuances. You're learning that having someone's playbook doesn't make you them, Michael interrupted. I gave you access to my processes and strategies. What I couldn't give you was 15 years of experience, judgment, and relationship equity. You can't download that in 18 months of observation. So this is revenge? You're trying to sabotage my success? Michael smiled. I'm not trying to do anything except succeed in my next chapter. If your success depends on my active support rather than your own capabilities, that's a problem you created, not one I'm responsible for solving. You think you can just waltz into a competitive market and clients will follow you? Pinnacle has resources, infrastructure, a brand name. And I have something more valuable, relationships built on trust and results. We'll see which matters more. Michael walked out of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions for the last time, carrying a box of personal items and a network of contacts worth more than any corporate infrastructure. 3 months later, the industry landscape had shifted dramatically. Michael's new consulting firm, Chen Strategic Partners, had signed 7 major clients in its first quarter. 4 of them former Pinnacle accounts that had chosen not to renew their contracts. Marcus Webb's Midwest Motors was the highest profile defection, but others followed. Derek, meanwhile, was struggling. His promised 20% revenue growth hadn't materialized, largely because the growth had been projected based on Michael's pending deals, several of which had walked away. The digital transformation initiatives that had sounded impressive in PowerPoint presentations had proven difficult to execute effectively, and without Michael's steady hand guiding client relationships, several key accounts were expressing dissatisfaction. Janet Morrison was facing increasing pressure from Pinnacle's board about declining performance and client retention issues. The bold restructuring was looking more like a strategic disaster. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months after Michael's departure. Derek called him on a Thursday afternoon. Michael, I need your advice on something. The irony was delicious. I'm listening. The board is reviewing my performance. Janet's position is shaky and mine isn't much better. I think I may have been overly ambitious in my projections and commitments. You think? I'm serious. I need help. You were the best mentor I ever had, and I screwed that up. I'm asking if there's any way we could work together again. Maybe I could bring some clients to your firm. We could partner on. Derek, let me stop you right there, Michael said. You once told me that in corporate America, nobody stays on top forever. You were right about that. You also said success is about identifying opportunities and exploiting them. I've identified an opportunity, building my own firm with clients who value loyalty and expertise. Bringing you into that would be a terrible exploitation of that opportunity. So that's it. You're just going to let me fail? I'm going to let you experience the natural consequences of your choices. You wanted to be the rising star, the digital disruptor, the executive who didn't need an old-school mentor holding you back. Well, now you get to prove you can succeed on those terms. Michael, please. Derek, I genuinely hope you succeed. I hope you learn from these challenges and become the executive you thought you already were. But those lessons need to come from experience, not from me rescuing you from situations you created. Michael ended the call feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Complete peace with the situation. He wasn't being cruel. He was simply refusing to be exploited twice by the same person. The epilogue to this story came 1 year after Michael left Pinnacle. Janet Morrison was forced out as CEO after 2 consecutive quarters of declining revenue and client losses. Derek was let go in the subsequent restructuring. Pinnacle was acquired by a larger agency holding company, and most of the senior leadership was replaced. Michael's firm, meanwhile, had grown to 15 employees and was on track to exceed $5 million in revenue in its second year. His client list included several Fortune 500 companies, and he'd been featured in industry publications as an example of successful entrepreneurship after corporate restructuring. The best revenge, Michael learned, wasn't destroying Derek's career directly. It was succeeding so completely that Derek's betrayal became the catalyst for something better than what Michael had lost. But the story has one final twist that brings everything full circle. 2 years after leaving Pinnacle, Michael received an email from a young professional named Sarah Kim. She just graduated from Northwestern's marketing program and wanted to meet for coffee to discuss career advice. Michael almost deleted the email. The last time he'd mentored someone, it had cost him his job. Why risk that again? But then he remembered who he was before Derek, someone who believed in paying forward knowledge and helping talented people succeed. He wouldn't let one betrayal change that fundamental part of his identity. He met Sarah for coffee. She was bright, enthusiastic, and genuinely hungry to learn. Over the next months, Michael mentored her carefully, but this time with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. He helped her develop skills and make connections, but he also taught her about professional ethics, the importance of loyalty, and the long-term value of building genuine relationships over short-term opportunism. Sarah thrived under his guidance and eventually joined Chen's strategic partners as a junior strategist. Unlike Derek, she proved to be exactly what she appeared, a talented professional, grateful for mentorship, and committed to building success through collaboration rather than exploitation. 3 years after his departure from Pinnacle, Michael was having lunch with Robert Martinez, who'd also left to join a different agency. "You ever think about Derek?" Robert asked. "Sometimes," Michael admitted. "Last I heard, he was working at a mid-sized agency in Atlanta, making decent money but nothing like what he thought he'd achieve." "You think he learned anything from it all?" "I hope so. I genuinely hope he became a better professional and person from the experience. But whether he did or not isn't my responsibility." "Do you regret mentoring him?" Michael thought about that for a moment. "No, I regret not setting better boundaries and not recognizing warning signs. But I don't regret trying to help someone succeed. If I let Derek's betrayal make me cynical and closed off, then he wins even after losing." "That's pretty evolved of you," Michael smiled. "It's practical. My success now, this firm, these clients, this reputation, exists because people trust me. That trust was built over years of being generous with my knowledge and authentic in my relationships. Derek tried to weaponize those qualities against me, but ultimately, they're what saved me." Speaking of which, I heard from Marcus Webb that Midwest Motors is expanding their marketing budget significantly next quarter. You're managing that? We are. And Sarah Kim is going to be the lead strategist on one of their new product launches. The mentee managing your most important client? Aren't you worried about history repeating? No, Michael said with confidence, because Sarah isn't Derek. I've been more careful about who I invest my time in, but I haven't stopped investing. The difference between wisdom and cynicism is knowing when to trust again, not whether to trust again. Robert raised his coffee cup in a toast to second chances and better judgment. "To building something better from the ashes," Michael countered. As they finished lunch and headed back to their respective offices, Michael reflected on the journey from that devastating February morning when he'd learned about his restructuring to this moment of hard-won success and peace. Derek had taught him something valuable, even if that wasn't Derek's intention. The mentorship relationship had been real. Michael had genuinely tried to help, and Derek had genuinely learned valuable skills. The betrayal had been real too. But what Michael chose to do with both the knowledge gained and the pain experienced, that was what defined him. He could have become bitter and vindictive. He could have devoted all his energy to destroying Derek's career out of revenge. Instead, he channeled that energy into building something better for himself and creating opportunities for others who deserved them. That evening, Michael was working late at the Chen strategic partner's office when Sarah stopped by his door. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Always." "What's up?" "I wanted to run something by you. I've been approached by a headhunter about a VP position at a larger agency. The money is significantly better, and it would be a big career jump." Michael felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the fear of being betrayed again, but he pushed it aside and asked the right question. "What do you want to do?" "Honestly, I love working here. I'm learning constantly. The work is challenging, and I trust you. but I also need to think about my long-term career trajectory and financial security. Those are valid considerations. What would you need to feel like staying here was the right long-term decision? Sarah outlined her thoughts. A clear path to partnership, specific development opportunities, compensation that acknowledged her market value. They were reasonable requests from someone who knew her worth. They spent an hour discussing options. By the end, they'd outlined a plan for Sarah's growth within Chen's strategic partners that addressed her concerns while keeping her on the team. It required flexibility and investment from Michael, but it was worth it for someone who'd proven herself trustworthy. After Sarah left, Michael sat in his office thinking about the difference between this conversation and the one he'd never had with Derek. With Sarah, there was honesty about ambitions and needs. With Derek, there had been deception and hidden agendas. The lesson wasn't to stop mentoring. The lesson was to mentor people whose values aligned with your own and to build relationships on transparency rather than blind trust. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb. Quick question about the Q4 strategy review. Got time for a call tomorrow? Michael smiled. These were the relationships that mattered, built over years, tested through challenges, strengthened by mutual respect, and delivered results. Derek had tried to take them by force, but he'd learned what Michael had always known. You can't steal relationships. You can only build them or destroy them. As Michael locked up the office and headed home, he thought about the young professional he'd been 15 years ago. Hungry, ambitious, grateful for any guidance. He thought about the executive he'd become at Pinnacle, successful but perhaps complacent, assuming goodwill was always reciprocated. And he thought about who he was now. Wiser, more careful, but still fundamentally committed to helping others succeed. Derek Williams had tried to climb over Michael Chen on his way to the top. Instead, he'd provided the motivation for Michael to build his own ladder, one that couldn't be taken away because it was constructed from genuine relationships, earned reputation, and hard-won expertise. The greatest revenge wasn't destroying Derek. It was becoming so successful that Derek's betrayal became a footnote in a much larger story of triumph. And the greatest vindication wasn't proving Derek wrong. It was proving that the values Derek had tried to exploit, generosity, mentorship, authentic relationship building, were actually the foundation of sustainable success. Michael Chen had been betrayed by the person he'd mentored. But in the end, that betrayal had forced him to build something better than he'd lost. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could happen to you. And Derek Williams? He learned the hardest lesson of his career. You can steal someone's position, but you can't steal their wisdom. You can copy their processes, but you can't duplicate their judgment. You can inherit their clients, but you can't command their loyalty. In the end, the student thought he'd surpassed the master, but the master was playing an entirely different game, one measured not in titles and offices, but in trust, relationships, and the kind of success that doesn't depend on standing on someone else's shoulders.